The call came in during my lunch break. Emergency repair request, high priority, off station. The details were sparse, but the pay was generous enough that I didn't ask too many questions. That's how it usually went in this line of work. When you're known as the best mechanic in the Altair quadrant, people tend to skip the pleasantries. "Jordan," my boss had said, scanning the work order with raised eyebrows. "They specifically requested you, said they heard you're good with your hands." I'd shrugged, wiping engine grease from my fingers. "When do they need me?" "Yesterday." And that's how I found myself standing in a dimly lit docking bay, staring up at the most peculiar vessel I'd ever seen. It didn't look manufactured so much as grown. Its hull curved and undulated, like something alive, with pulsing veins of light that ran across its surface in patterns reminiscent of ancient runes. The ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of our largest Earth vessels. But somehow, it seemed to breathe in the cavernous space. "Are you the mechanic?" A cool voice startled me from behind. I turned to find 3 figures watching me with varying degrees of interest. They were humanoid, but unmistakably alien, their skin tones ranging from iridescent blue to a deep amber that seemed to glow from within. All 3 were female, or at least presented as such, with features that were both familiar and foreign at once. Beautiful, but in a way that made my spine tingle with instinctive caution. "Jordan Chen, at your service," I said, extending my hand. None of them took it. The tallest one, with skin like polished sapphire and eyes that reminded me of the void between stars, stepped forward. "I am Sira, commander of this vessel. These are my officers, Nara and Kyle." Nara had the amber skin, her hair floating around her head as if suspended in water, despite the normal gravity. Kyle was the most human-looking of the 3, but her eyes were vertical slits like a cat's, and when she nodded in acknowledgement, I caught a glimpse of sharp teeth. "Your reputation precedes you," Sira continued. "We have a sensitive malfunction in our engine compartment. You will repair it. We will compensate you as agreed, and you will return to your station. Is this arrangement acceptable?" There was something in her tone that made it clear this wasn't really a question, but I nodded anyway. "Show me the problem, and I'll see what I can do." They led me through corridors that seemed to shift subtly as we walked, as if the ship itself was rearranging to accommodate our passage. The walls had the same organic quality as the exterior, pulsing with life, warm to the touch when I brushed my fingers against them. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something else I couldn't identify, something like cinnamon and sea salt. "Has this ship been biologically modified?" I asked, trying to make conversation as we descended deeper into the vessel. Kyle, who was walking behind me, made a sound that might have been a laugh. "The ship is biological. There is no modification." "A living ship?" I couldn't keep the wonder from my voice. We'd heard rumors of such technology, but Earth engineers were decades, maybe centuries away from such achievements. "It is more than living." Nara spoke for the first time, her voice melodic and strangely comforting. "It is aware." Before I could ask what that meant, Sira stopped before a massive door that pulsed with angry red light. "Our engine compartment. The damage is inside. We will wait here." "You're not coming in," I frowned, suddenly less confident. "The ship is sensitive right now," Sira explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "It responds better to strangers in moments of distress." That made absolutely no sense from an engineering standpoint, but I'd worked with enough eccentric clients to know when to keep my questions to myself. I hoisted my toolbox higher on my shoulder and stepped forward as the door parted, like living tissue. The engine room was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Instead of the expected machinery, I found myself in what appeared to be the heart of some enormous creature. Transparent tubes, thick as tree trunks, pulsed with luminescent fluid, coiling around a central core that glowed with an intensity that should have hurt my eyes, but somehow didn't. The floor beneath my feet was slightly yielding, like walking on firm moss. And there, on the far side of the chamber, was the problem. A jagged tear in what appeared to be a critical membrane, leaking a silvery substance that hissed when it hit the floor. The damage looked almost deliberate, as if something had clawed its way through the living tissue. I approached carefully, setting down my toolbox and examining the tear without touching it. The edges of the wound, because that's what it was. A wound, pulsed and quivered as if in pain. My usual repair protocols seemed woefully inadequate here. "What am I supposed to do with this?" I muttered to myself, rifling through my tools. Nothing I had was designed for organic repairs. Out of instinct, more than reason, I pressed my palm against the undamaged section of the membrane beside the tear. The response was immediate and shocking. A jolt of energy ran up my arm, and the membrane warmed beneath my touch. The ship was reacting to me. Curious. I moved my hand closer to the damaged area, and the pulsing lights around me quickened. It was almost as if the ship was trying to communicate. Following a hunch, I placed both hands on either side of the tear and closed my eyes, concentrating on the sensation beneath my fingers. The membrane trembled, and I felt rather than saw the torn edges begin to reach toward each other. My hands tingled with pins and needles, but I kept them in place, somehow knowing this was right. After several minutes of this strange communion, I opened my eyes to find the tear reduced by half, the edges knitting together like healing skin. "Incredible," I whispered. I spent the next few hours in that state of focused connection, guiding the ship's natural healing process, rather than imposing external repairs. By the time I stepped back, exhausted but exhilarated, the tear was completely sealed, not even a scar remaining to show where it had been. Gathering my unused tools, I made my way back to the entrance, eager to share my success with the 3 officers. But when the door parted, I found only Syra waiting, her expression unreadable. "It is done," I told her, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "The ship healed itself. I just helped it along somehow." Syra's eyes narrowed slightly. "Show me." I led her to the repaired membrane, explaining what had happened. As I spoke, her expression shifted from skepticism to something more complex. Concern mingled with what looked like resignation. "You touched the ship directly," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, it seemed to respond to—" "And it responded to you. It accepted your assistance." She was no longer looking at the repaired section, but at me, studying me with uncomfortable intensity. "Look, I just did what seemed right at the time," I said, suddenly defensive. "The job's done, so I'll be heading back now. You can transfer the payment to my account." Syra straightened, her full height imposing in the organic chamber. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Jordan." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "The arrangement has changed. You will not be returning to your station." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I forced a laugh. "That's not how contracts work. Commander, I was hired to fix a problem, and I fixed it. Now I go home." "You do not understand what has happened here," Syra said, her voice softening slightly. "When you touched the ship, when you helped it heal itself, you established a connection, a bond. The ship has chosen you." "Chosen me for what?" My voice rose an octave. "To be its listener, its companion." She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "This is a great honor." "I don't want an honor," I said, backing toward the door. "I want to go home." Syra shook her head. "That is no longer possible. The ship needs you now." "The ship is a ship," I insisted. "It doesn't need anything from me." "You are wrong," she replied simply. "And you will come to understand this in time. For now, Nera will show you to your quarters." As if summoned by her words, the door parted again to reveal Nera waiting patiently in the corridor. Her amber eyes regarded me with what might have been sympathy. "This is kidnapping," I hissed at Sierra. People will look for me. They will be told you accepted a long-term assignment, Sierra responded, unmoved. It is not uncommon in your profession. I believe. She was right. And that realization made my stomach sink. Emergency calls that turned into extended contracts weren't unusual for specialists like me. No one would question my absence for months, maybe longer. Come, Nera said gently, extending a hand that I refused to take. You must be tired after your work. With Sierra's unyielding presence behind me, and no clear way to escape a ship in deep space, I reluctantly followed Nera into the corridor. The lights pulsed around us as we walked, and I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that the ship was watching me, aware of my every movement. What is this place? I finally asked, as we turned down yet another identical organic hallway. What are you people? Nera glanced at me, her expression thoughtful. We are the Triumvirate, the three chosen to guide this vessel on its journey. As for what this place is, she gestured at the living walls around us. This is Heartwood, the last of its kind, and now, your home. I already have a home, I said flatly. You had a home, she corrected gently. Now you have a purpose. Before I could argue further. She stopped before a section of wall that dilated open at her approach. Inside was a chamber unlike the utilitarian quarters I'd expected. The room was spacious and curved, with the same organic architecture as the rest of the ship, but somehow more refined. A bed, or something like a bed, grew from one wall, covered in what appeared to be soft moss. Shelves and niches had formed in the walls, and a window looked out into the star-strewn void. The room will adapt to your preferences over time, Nera explained. It responds to your needs, both spoken and unspoken. What I need is to leave, I said, crossing my arms. Nera's amber eyes studied me with unexpected compassion. I understand your resistance. I, too, was brought here against my will, many cycles ago. That caught my attention. You were kidnapped, too. I was chosen, she corrected, as were Syra and Kyle. As are you now. The ship does not make mistakes in its selections. So what? I'm supposed to just accept this? Become some kind of ship whisperer? Nera's lips curved in what might have been a smile. The listener is more than that. But yes, acceptance will come, in time. Rest now. Tomorrow. Your training begins. Before I could demand more answers, she slipped out of the room, the wall sealing seamlessly behind her. I immediately threw myself against it, searching for any kind of panel or control. But the surface was smooth and unyielding beneath my hands. Let me out, I shouted, pounding on the wall. The only response was a dimming of the lights and a soft, almost apologetic pulsing from the ceiling. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I sank onto the moss bed, which molded itself to my body with disturbing comfort. As I stared up at the ceiling, watching the patterns of light shift and flow, one thought circled endlessly in my mind. I had to find a way off this ship. I must have fallen asleep despite my determination to stay alert, because I woke to the sound of my wall dilating open. Kyle stood in the doorway, her feline eyes regarding me with detached interest. It is time, she said simply. I sat up, rubbing sleep from my eyes. Time for what? For you to begin understanding your role. She remained in the doorway, clearly expecting me to follow. My initial instinct was to refuse, to demand answers or freedom. But the strategic part of my brain overruled my indignation. If I was going to find a way off this ship, I needed to understand it better, its systems, its vulnerabilities, and especially its crew. I followed Kyle through corridors that seemed different from those I'd traversed the day before. The organic walls here were threaded with deeper blues and purples, and they pulsed with a rhythm that reminded me of breathing. Where are we going? I asked, jogging slightly to keep pace with Kyle's long strides. To the listening chamber, she replied, without slowing. It is where you will learn to hear the ship properly. I'm a mechanic, not a whatever you think I am, I protested. I fix things with tools, not by listening to them. Kyle glanced back at me, something like amusement flickering across her features. And yet, you did not use your tools to repair the membrane, did you? You used your hands, your instinct, your ability to connect. I had no good response to that, so I followed in sullen silence until we reached a circular doorway that glowed with soft, golden light. Unlike the other entrances I'd seen, this one didn't dilate automatically. Kyle stepped aside. Only the listener may enter the chamber. I eyed the door suspiciously. What am I supposed to do in there? Listen, she said, as if it were obvious. When I made no move to enter, she sighed, a surprisingly human gesture from her alien features. The ship is in pain, Jordan. It has been for some time. The tear you repaired was merely a symptom of a deeper distress. If you truly wish to understand why you are here, why you cannot leave, then you must enter and listen. And if I refuse? Her vertical pupils contracted slightly. Then we will remain here until you change your mind. I have great patience. Something in her tone made me believe her. With a resigned sigh, I approached the golden door, which parted silently at my touch. Inside was a small, dome-shaped room with a single chair-like structure in the center. The walls here were unlike those in the rest of the ship. They shimmered with thousands of tiny lights that moved in complex patterns, like stars, rearranging themselves. Sit, Kyle instructed from the doorway. Close your eyes and listen. The door sealed behind me as I cautiously approached the chair. Like the bed in my quarters, it seemed to be a living extension of the ship itself. As I sat, it conformed to my body, cradling me in unexpected comfort. Feeling slightly ridiculous, but seeing no alternative, I closed my eyes. At first, there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the faint hum that permeated the entire vessel. But gradually, as my heart rate slowed and my mind quieted, I began to sense something else, a presence, vast and ancient, brushing against the edges of my consciousness. It wasn't words exactly, more like impressions, colors, emotions, and fragmented images that flashed behind my eyelids. I saw stars being born and dying, felt the cold emptiness of space and the warm proximity of inhabited worlds. And underneath it all, a profound loneliness that made my chest ache with unexpected sympathy. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in that strange communion. But when I finally opened my eyes, the patterns of light on the walls had changed. They moved more rapidly now, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. The door dilated open, and Sierra stood there instead of Kyle, watching me with keen interest. "What did you hear?" she asked. I struggled to put the experience into words. "It's lonely. The ship. I mean, it showed me stars, planets, vast distances, and a sense of, I don't know, loss? Separation?" Syra nodded, a hint of approval in her expression. Heartwood is the last of the great bioships. Its kind once traveled in groups, communities that shared consciousness across the void. Now it journeys alone. "So that's why you're keeping me here? Because your ship is lonely." I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. "It is more complex than that," Sierra replied. "Come. It is time you understood more about your new home." Despite my continued protests, I found myself following her through more winding corridors, up to what appeared to be a command deck. Through a vast, transparent viewport, I could see the blackness of space stretching endlessly before us, punctuated by distant stars and the faint, colorful smudge of a nebula. Nara and Kyle were already there, working at stations that seemed to grow directly from the floor. The controls weren't mechanical, but appeared to be responsive to touch and thought. Their hands hovered over pulsing lights that changed and shifted with each subtle movement. Heartwood is more than a vessel, Syra explained, gesturing around the bridge. It is a living archive, a repository of knowledge and history from hundreds of worlds. It carries within it the last memories of civilizations long extinct, preserved in its neural network. If it's so important, why don't you have a proper crew? I asked. Just the three of you running this entire ship seems inefficient. Heartwood chooses its own crew, Nera answered, without looking up from her station. It is selective. Throughout our journey, it has selected only a handful of individuals it deems compatible with its consciousness. We are those chosen few. And now, so are you, Kyle added. I shook my head, frustration building. I never asked for this. I can't just abandon my life, my family. You have no family, Sira interrupted, her voice matter of fact. No spouse, no children. Your parents are deceased. Your closest relationship is with your boss, who you describe as a decent guy for a capitalist. These are your own words, from your station records. The accuracy of her assessment left me momentarily speechless. It was true. My life on the station had been solitary, focused almost entirely on my work. But that didn't mean it wasn't my life, my choice. The ship needs a listener, Nera said gently. Someone who can interpret its needs, communicate with its deepest consciousness. The previous listener passed beyond, and Heartwood has been adrift since then, unable to fully express its distress. So that tear in the engine room was Heartwood's cry for help, Kyle finished. A physical manifestation of its psychic pain. And I just happened to be the unlucky mechanic who answered the call? I asked bitterly. Syra's expression softened slightly. There is no luck involved. Heartwood sensed your compatibility from across the quadrant. It called to you specifically. Great, I muttered, cosmically catfished by a depressed spaceship. To my surprise, Kyle made that strange laughing sound again. Your humor is unusual, but not unpleasant. It has been too long since there was laughter aboard Heartwood. You'll forgive me if I don't feel like bringing the party right now, I said, crossing my arms. I'm still processing the whole kidnapping situation. You are not a prisoner, Syra stated firmly. You are crew. There is a difference. Really? So I can leave whenever I want? The three exchanged glances that answered my question more clearly than words could have. Your presence here is necessary, Syra finally said. In time, you will understand why. And if I don't, if I never understand or accept the situation, what then? Nera moved from her station to approach me, her amber eyes searching mine. Then you will live a half-life, Jordan, fighting against a connection that could bring you fulfillment beyond anything you have known. I have seen it before. It is painful to witness. There was something in her tone, a depth of feeling that suggested she was speaking from experience. Before I could question her further, a sudden tremor ran through the ship, violent enough to make us all grab for support. The lights throughout the bridge flashed red, and a sound like a mournful whale song echoed through the chamber. The floor beneath our feet vibrated with increasing intensity. What's happening? I demanded, as another tremor shook the ship. Heartwood is in distress, Kyle said, returning to her station. It senses danger. Syra moved swiftly to what appeared to be the main control interface, her hands dancing over the pulsing lights. Spatial anomaly ahead. The neural pathways are becoming erratic. The ship lurched again, more violently this time, and I was thrown against a wall that seemed to cushion my impact. Through the viewport, I could see space itself appearing to ripple and distort, the stars blurring and stretching. We cannot navigate through this in Heartwood's current state, Nera said, her voice tense. The neural network is too fragile. It cannot process the sensory input. Can't you just, I don't know, go around it? I suggested, picking myself up. Heartwood doesn't navigate like your mechanical vessels, Syra snapped, her composure cracking for the first time. It moves in response to its own understanding of space-time. Right now, It cannot properly perceive or respond. It is. Panicking, I finished, suddenly understanding. The ship was a living entity facing a threat it couldn't comprehend, and its fear was manifesting as physical distress. Without thinking, I pressed my hand against the nearest wall, feeling the rapid, erratic pulsing beneath my palm. "It needs to calm down," I said, remembering how the ship had responded to my touch in the engine room. "It needs to focus." "Yes," Nera agreed, watching me intently. "This is why it needs a listener, especially now." Another violent shudder ran through the ship, and the lights flickered ominously. The whale song cry rose in pitch, becoming almost painful to hear. "Take me back to the listening chamber," I said suddenly, an idea forming. "Quickly!" Kyle looked to Syra, who gave a sharp nod of approval. Within moments, Kyle was leading me at a run through corridors that seemed to contract and expand with the ship's distress. When we reached the golden door, it dilated instantly, almost eagerly, at my approach. "What are you planning to do?" Kyle asked as I stepped inside. "I'm going to listen," I replied, "and then, hopefully, talk back." The door sealed behind me, and I practically fell into the central chair. The walls around me were chaotic now, the lights flashing in disjointed patterns that hurt my eyes. The entire chamber trembled with the ship's distress. Closing my eyes, I pressed both hands against the arms of the chair and tried to center myself despite the chaos around me. "I'm here," I said aloud, feeling slightly foolish but somehow certain this was right. "I can hear you. Show me what's wrong." The response was immediate and overwhelming. A torrent of sensory information crashed over me like a wave. I gasped as my mind was flooded with the ship's perception of the spatial anomaly, a writhing, tearing distortion in the fabric of reality that assaulted Hartwood's sensitive neural network like needles of fire. Pain, confusion, and blind terror washed through me, so intense that for a moment I lost all sense of my own identity. I was Hartwood, massive and ancient, hurtling toward a phenomenon I couldn't comprehend with my damaged perception. With tremendous effort, I pulled myself back from total immersion, maintaining a tenuous grip on my human consciousness. "It's okay," I heard myself saying, though my voice sounded distant and strange. "I see it now. I understand." The chaos of images and sensations began to organize themselves in my mind, forming a pattern I could interpret. The anomaly wasn't actually dangerous. It was a natural fluctuation in space-time, something Hartwood would normally navigate with ease. But the ship's neural network was fragmented, connections severed or rerouted incorrectly, causing it to misinterpret the sensory data. Instinctively, I focused on those broken connections, visualizing them as the torn membrane I'd helped heal in the engine room. In my mind's eye, I could see the entire neural structure of the ship, vast and complex, with damaged sections glowing like wounds. "Let me help you," I murmured, directing my attention to the most critical breaks in the network. "Show me how to fix this." Again, that flood of information, but more controlled now. Images of cellular structures, patterns of energy, the correct configuration of neural pathways. Hartwood was teaching me, showing me what it needed. Time lost all meaning as I worked within that mental landscape, guiding severed connections back together, reinforcing weakened pathways, clearing blockages in the flow of information. It was exhausting, demanding work that required absolute concentration. But with each repair, I could feel the ship's distress lessening, its consciousness becoming more ordered and calm. Finally, I sensed a shift. The neural network stabilized, pathways glowing with healthy light in my mind's eye. Through Hartwood's senses, I perceived the spatial anomaly again, but this time, as it truly was, a beautiful, swirling pattern in the fabric of space, easily navigated with the proper adjustments. Almost without conscious thought, I directed those adjustments, feeling the ship respond to my guidance. Hartwood moved with new confidence, slipping through the anomaly like a fish through water. When I finally opened my eyes, the listening chamber was calm, its walls pulsing with a steady, peaceful rhythm. My body felt leaden with exhaustion, but my mind was strangely exhilarated, buzzing with the after-effects of such intimate connection. The door dilated open, and all three officers stood there, their expressions a mixture of awe and relief. "You did it," Nara said softly. "You restored the neural pathways. Hartwood is whole again." I struggled to rise from the chair, my legs weak beneath me. Kyle moved forward to offer support, her usual aloofness replaced with something like respect. "How long was I in here?" I asked, my voice hoarse. 3 cycles, Syra answered. "We feared we had lost you to the deep connection." 3 days, I shook my head in disbelief. It felt like hours. "Time moves differently in deep communion," Nara explained. "It is why the role of listener is so demanding, so precious." As Kyle helped me from the chamber, I found the corridors noticeably different, brighter, more vibrant, the organic walls pulsing with healthy energy. Crew members I hadn't seen before nodded to me respectfully as we passed, their alien features expressing clear gratitude. "There are more people on board?" I asked, surprised. "Hartwood carries a small complement of specialists," Syra explained, walking beside me. "They serve specific functions but are not part of the core crew. They have been avoiding the common areas during Hartwood's distress." We returned to the bridge, where the viewport now showed normal space, stars shining steadily against the blackness. The sense of crisis had passed, replaced by an atmosphere of quiet efficiency. "You should rest," Nara said, touching my arm lightly. "The deep communion takes a significant toll on the physical body." I wanted to argue, to demand more answers about what had happened and what it meant for my future. But exhaustion overwhelmed me. I allowed Kyle to escort me back to my quarters, where the moss bed looked impossibly inviting. "You have done well, Jordan," Kyle said as she prepared to leave. "Hartwood is grateful." "I still want to go home," I mumbled, even as I sank into the comfort of the bed. Kyle tilted her head, studying me with those vertical pupilled eyes. "Are you certain of that? After what you just experienced?" The question followed me into sleep, where my dreams were filled with stars and the gentle, grateful presence of Hartwood cradling my consciousness. Days on the bioship blended into weeks, and gradually, despite my continued protests, I found myself adapting to life aboard Hartwood. My quarters expanded and evolved to suit my preferences, sprouting a workspace with tools that grew from the living walls, adjusting the lighting to match Earth's day-night cycle, even producing a simulation of rainfall when I mentioned missing the sound of storms. My training as listener continued under the guidance of all 3 officers, each bringing their unique perspective to the role. Syra focused on discipline and structure, teaching me to maintain my own identity while connecting with Hartwood's vast consciousness. Nara showed me how to interpret the emotional currents that ran through the ship, distinguishing between its basic needs and deeper yearnings. And Kyle, surprisingly, became something of a friend. Her initial aloofness, giving way to wry humor and practical advice about surviving as the newest member of a very exclusive crew. "It took me nearly a cycle to stop trying to cut my way out of the ship," she confided during one of our training sessions. "I was a warrior on my world, unused to confinement." "What changed?" I asked, curious despite myself. Her lips curved in that not-quite smile. "Hartwood showed me the stars as it sees them. After that, my world seemed small. The ship itself continued to surprise me with its complexity. The more time I spent in the listening chamber, the more I understood that Hartwood wasn't simply a vessel or even a single consciousness. It was a collective, a living archive of countless minds and memories stored within its neural network. Some were alien species long extinct, Others were previous crew members who had chosen to merge their consciousness with the ship at the end of their physical lives. This revelation came during a particularly deep communion session, when I'd asked Hartwood to show me more about its origins. Instead of the expected images of its creation, I was flooded with thousands of distinct perspectives, life stories, scientific knowledge, artistic creations, all preserved within the living memory of the ship. "It's not just a ship," I said in wonder when I emerged from the chamber to find Nera waiting. "It's a civilization." "Yes," she agreed simply. "The last repository of many worlds that no longer exist. This is why its preservation is so vital." Despite these discoveries, I hadn't abandoned my desire to return home. Each night, I still fell asleep planning possible escape routes, mapping the ship's systems for vulnerabilities. But as the weeks passed, those plans became more abstract, less urgent. The truth I was reluctant to admit, even to myself, was that I was beginning to find purpose here, a connection deeper than anything I'd known on Earth or the space station. The adaptive food bay became my favorite place for contemplation. Unlike the strictly utilitarian cafeterias of Earth vessels, Hartwood's Nutrition Center was a wonder of biological engineering. Living plants grew from the walls and ceiling, producing fruits and vegetables that adapted their taste and texture according to the preferences of whoever plucked them. The first time I'd bitten into what looked like an apple, only to have it taste exactly like my mother's homemade cinnamon rolls, I'd nearly wept with the unexpected nostalgia. It was in this food bay, absently spinning what appeared to be a purple pear between my fingers, that Sira found me one cycle, her expression more solemn than usual. "You have progressed well in your training," she said, taking a seat across from me. "Faster than any listener before you." "Thanks, I think," I replied, still not entirely comfortable with compliments from the commanding officer who had essentially kidnapped me. "It is time for you to understand the full purpose of your role," she continued, ignoring my sarcasm, "and the true nature of our mission." I set down the fruit, suddenly alert. In all my weeks aboard, none of the officers had spoken of a specific mission or destination. Hartwood simply traveled, occasionally pausing near uninhabited planets to replenish resources through processes I still didn't fully understand. "I'm listening," I said, the phrase having taken on new meaning since my arrival. Syra's dark eyes studied me carefully. "Hartwood is dying, Jordan." The statement hit me with unexpected force. "What? But it seems healthier than ever since I repaired the neural pathways." "You have extended its life, given it comfort in its decline. But the fundamental deterioration continues." Her voice was steady, but I detected an undercurrent of genuine grief. Bioships are not meant to travel alone. The constant isolation from others of its kind has taken a toll that cannot be reversed. "Then find more bioships," I suggested. "There must be others somewhere." "There are none," she interrupted. "Hartwood is the last. The others were destroyed in a war that predates my species' written history. So what's the mission then? Some kind of elaborate hospice care for a dying ship?" Syra's expression hardened at my flippancy. "Our mission is preservation and rebirth. Hartwood carries within it the seeds of new bioships, genetic material that can be cultivated under the right conditions, with the right guidance. We seek a world where these seeds can be planted, where a new generation of living vessels might grow." I sat back, absorbing this information. And my role in all this? The listener is the bridge between Hartwood's consciousness and the new vessels. You will guide the transfer of memory, ensure that the knowledge of 1,000 extinct civilizations is not lost. She leaned forward, her intensity palpable. "This is why you cannot leave, Jordan. This is why Hartwood chose you. Your connection, your ability to communicate with the ship's deepest consciousness, is unique. We have searched for decades for someone with your particular resonance." The weight of this responsibility settled over me like a physical presence. "And if I refuse? If I still want to go home?" Syra's expression didn't change. Then Heartwood will die without passing on its legacy, and the last memories of countless worlds will die with it. That is your choice. She rose and left me there, surrounded by living plants in a dying ship, the purple pear forgotten in my hand. That night, sleep eluded me. I paced my quarters, watching the walls pulse with the now familiar rhythm that I recognized as Heartwood's equivalent of peaceful breathing. The ship that had been my prison was dying, and somehow, that knowledge filled me with a grief I hadn't expected to feel. On impulse, I pressed my palm against the nearest wall, closing my eyes and focusing on the sensation of connection that had become second nature. "Is it true?" I asked silently. "Are you dying?" The response wasn't in words but in feelings. Acceptance, weariness, but also hope and a deep, abiding affection directed at me personally. Heartwood was acknowledging its mortality, while expressing gratitude for my presence during its final journey. Tears pricked behind my eyelids. "I'm sorry," I whispered aloud. "I've been so focused on leaving that I haven't been fully present with you." The wall warmed beneath my touch, a gentle forgiveness that made my throat tight with emotion. In that moment, something shifted within me, a resistance I'd been holding since my arrival, finally giving way to acceptance. Over the following cycles, I threw myself into my role with new dedication. I spent hours in the listening chamber, delving deeper into Heartwood's consciousness than ever before, learning the intricacies of its neural network and the vast library of knowledge it contained. I worked with Nera to understand the emotional needs of a dying entity, with Kyle to strengthen my mental discipline, and with Syra to prepare for the eventual transfer of consciousness to new vessels. The ship responded to my commitment with increased openness, sharing aspects of its existence that it had previously kept hidden. I experienced memories of ancient Earth, seen through the eyes of the first human to board a bioship. I witnessed the destruction of worlds whose names had been lost to time, preserved only in Heartwood's living memory. I felt the joy of communion when bioships had gathered in great fleets, their collective consciousness spanning galaxies. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, my perspective changed. The life I'd left behind, the cramped apartment on the space station, the endless cycle of repair jobs, the solitary evenings spent tinkering with obsolete tech, began to seem distant and small compared to the vast, interconnected existence I now shared with Heartwood. "You're not trying to escape anymore," Kyle observed one day as we shared a meal in the food bay. It wasn't a question. I shrugged, biting into a fruit that tasted like memories of summer. "Maybe there are worse fates than being cosmically kidnapped by a sentient spaceship." Her vertical pupils widened slightly in amusement. "Syra was right about you. You adapt quickly." "Speaking of Syra," I said, seizing the opportunity to satisfy a curiosity that had been growing. "What's her story? How did she end up here?" Kyle was silent for a moment, considering. Syra was a scientist on her world, studying the theoretical possibility of bioengineered space travel. Heartwood appeared in her planet's orbit, causing considerable panic among her people. She alone recognized what it was and volunteered to make first contact. Her lips curved in that not-quite smile. She expected to spend a few days gathering data. That was 17 Earth years ago. "And Nera?" "A healer from a world with strong empathic traditions. Heartwood was unwell when it found her. She soothed its distress enough that it could continue its journey." "And you? The warrior who tried to cut her way out?" Kyle's expression grew distant. "My world was dying. Environmental collapse after centuries of warfare. I was assigned to a last hope mission, seeking habitable planets. Heartwood rescued me when my ship was damaged beyond repair." She refocused on me, her alien eyes surprisingly warm. "We were all brought here by necessity, Jordan, but we stay by choice." Her words stayed with me as cycles continued to pass. The ship traveled on, moving with purpose now, toward a destination Syra had identified as promising for the seeding of new bioships. My communion with Heartwood deepened until I could sense its presence even outside the listening chamber, a constant, comforting backdrop to my consciousness. And then, without warning, crisis struck again. I was in my quarters when I felt it, a sudden, searing pain that tore through my mind like wildfire. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as Heartwood's distress flooded through our connection. This wasn't like the confusion during the spatial anomaly. This was pure agony, a fundamental rupture in the ship's neural network. The wall nearest me dilated, and Nara rushed in, her amber skin pale with concern. "Jordan, can you stand?" "What's happening?" I gasped, the pain making it difficult to focus. "Neural collapse," she said grimly, helping me to my feet. "We need to get you to the listening chamber immediately." The corridors were chaos as we made our way through the ship, lights flashing red and gold, the walls themselves trembling with distress. Crew members rushed past us, their faces tight with fear. Through our connection, I could feel Heartwood's consciousness fracturing, breaking apart in ways that threatened its very existence. When we reached the listening chamber, Syra and Kyle were already there, their expressions grim. "The deterioration has accelerated beyond our projections," Syra said without preamble. "The neural network is failing systematically. If the collapse continues at this rate, we have hours, not days." "But we haven't reached the seeding world yet," I protested, the implications sinking in. "If Heartwood dies now, then all is lost," she finished, her voice flat. "Unless you can stabilize the network enough for us to reach the Ganymede system." I looked between the three officers, confusion mixing with the pain still radiating through my connection with the ship. "What can I do that you can't?" "The listener's connection is unique," Nara explained, her hand steady on my arm. "You can reach parts of Heartwood's consciousness that are closed to us. If anyone can guide it through this crisis, it's you." The weight of their expectation pressed down on me like a physical force. Hours ago, I might have hesitated, might have questioned whether I was ready for such responsibility. But now, feeling Heartwood's pain as my own, there was no question of what I needed to do. "I'll try," I said simply, moving toward the central chair. "Jordan," Kyle called as I sat down. When I looked back, her expression was uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Heartwood is not the only one who needs you to succeed. We do as well." I nodded once, understanding the depth of what she wasn't saying. Then I closed my eyes and allowed myself to fall into the deepest communion I had ever attempted. The experience defied description in human terms. I was everywhere and nowhere, spread across the vast neural network of the ship, witnessing its collapse from within. The damage was catastrophic. Entire sections of consciousness shutting down, memories vanishing like stars being extinguished one by one. At the core of this chaos, I found Heartwood's central awareness, the oldest, most fundamental part of its being. It recognized me instantly, reaching out with what felt like desperate relief. "I'm here," I communicated, not in words but in pure intention. "Show me how to help you." What followed was the most grueling mental work I had ever undertaken. Under Heartwood's guidance, I moved through the failing network, redirecting neural pathways, reinforcing critical junctions, preserving the most vital memories and functions while allowing less essential systems to go dormant. It was like trying to rewire a city's entire electrical grid while it was actively collapsing around me. Time lost all meaning in that state of deep communion. I was vaguely aware of my physical body, the sweat pouring down my face, the trembling in my limbs, the concerned voices of the officers as they monitored my vital signs. But these sensations seemed distant and unimportant compared to the work at hand. At some point, I became aware that we were moving, the ship accelerating toward its destination with the last of its strength. Through our connection, I could sense Heartwood's determination. It would reach the seeding world, complete its final mission, no matter the cost. And the cost was terrible. to maintain the essential functions needed for navigation and life support. Whole sections of memory had to be sacrificed. I wept internally as civilizations vanished forever, their last records dissolving into nothingness. Yet, Heartwood accepted these losses with a grace that humbled me, focusing its remaining strength on the hope of renewal. When I finally emerged from communion, I found myself cradled in Kyle's arms, her normally stoic features tight with concern. Nera hovered nearby, monitoring something on a biological interface that pulsed weakly with light. "Did it work?" I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. "We've reached the Ganymede system," Kyle confirmed. "Heartwood is still functioning, but barely. Syra is preparing the seeding procedure now." I struggled to sit up, my body protesting after what must have been days in the chair. "I need to be there. Heartwood needs me present for the transfer." They didn't argue, helping me to my feet and supporting me as we made our way to a section of the ship I had never seen before. A vast chamber at Heartwood's very heart, where the walls pulsed with the last of the ship's fading life force. Syra stood at the center, surrounded by what appeared to be large, luminescent eggs suspended in transparent fluid. "The seeds," Nera explained softly, as I stared in wonder. "Each contains the potential for a new bioship, but without the transfer of consciousness, they would be empty vessels, alive but without memory or purpose." Syra looked up as we entered, her expression softening with relief when she saw me. "You've done the impossible, Jordan. Heartwood should not have survived such extensive neural collapse." "It nearly didn't," I said, moving to stand beside her. Through our connection, I could feel Heartwood's consciousness flickering like a candle in the wind. "We need to hurry." She nodded, indicating a place for me to stand among the seeds. "The transfer process is ancient, predating any of our civilizations. I can initiate it, but only the listener can guide the consciousness transfer." I took my position, placing my hands on two of the luminescent eggs as instructed. They were warm to the touch and seemed to pulse in response to my contact. Closing my eyes, I opened my mind fully to Heartwood one last time. The ship's fading consciousness greeted me with profound gratitude and affection. I sensed no fear in it, only acceptance and a deep, serene joy at having completed its final journey. As Syra began the transfer procedure, activating biological processes I couldn't begin to comprehend, Heartwood shared with me its last, most precious gift, the complete memory of its existence, from its birth among the stars to this final moment of transformation. I experienced millennia in what might have been minutes, living countless lives across the span of galaxies. I wept and laughed and loved through the experiences of beings whose forms I could barely imagine. And through it all, I felt Heartwood's constant presence, guiding me, preparing me for what was to come. As the transfer reached its culmination, Heartwood's consciousness divided, flowing like water into the waiting seeds through the conduit of my mind. With each passing moment, the ship's presence in my mind dimmed, but instead of emptiness, I found new connections forming, tiny sparks of awareness from the developing bioships, reaching out with newborn curiosity. When it was done, when the last echo of Heartwood's ancient consciousness had passed into its offspring, I opened my eyes to find the chamber transformed. The eggs glowed with vibrant life, their surfaces now marked with patterns reminiscent of the runes I'd first seen on Heartwood's hull. The walls around us had lost their luster, the organic material beginning to fade to a dull gray. "It is complete," Syra said softly, her hand on my shoulder. "Heartwood's legacy is preserved." I nodded, unable to speak through the tightness in my throat. The absence of Heartwood's consciousness in my mind left an ache that felt physical, a hollow space where something vast and precious had dwelled. "What happens now?" I finally asked, looking at the three officers, my crew, my friends. "Now we nurture the seeds until they are ready to be planted in the oceans of Ganymede 4. Nara explained. From there, they will grow into the first new bioships in 10,000 years. And us? What's our role now that Heartwood is— I couldn't bring myself to say the word dead. Transformed, Kyle corrected gently. Not ended. And our role remains the same, to guide, to protect, to preserve knowledge across the stars. She gestured at the glowing seeds. These new vessels will need a crew. They will need a listener. I looked around at the fading chamber, at the ship that had been my reluctant home and then my calling. Despite the ache of loss, I felt something else growing within me, a sense of purpose, of belonging, stronger than anything I'd known in my previous life. I'm staying, I said, the decision crystallizing in that moment. I want to see this through, help the new ships grow, teach them what Heartwood showed me. Sierra's expression softened into the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. We hoped you would say that. The ships have already formed a connection with you, Nara added, her amber eyes warm. They recognize you as their guide. I stepped closer to the glowing seeds, placing my hand on one that seemed to pulse in response to my touch. In my mind, I felt a tentative brush of consciousness, curious, innocent, but with echoes of ancient wisdom. The beginning of a new bond, a new purpose. Then let's get to work, I said, feeling the last of my resistance fall away. We have a new fleet to raise. As we left the chamber, I glanced back one last time at the fading walls of Heartwood, the ship that had changed everything for me. Thank you, I whispered, though the consciousness that would have heard me was gone, transformed into new life. Ahead lay an uncertain future among the stars, with 3 alien companions who had become my family, and the promise of new bioships to guide. It wasn't the life I had planned or chosen initially, but standing on the threshold of this new chapter, I couldn't imagine wanting anything else. They had said I was good with my hands, but Heartwood had taught me the greater value of listening. And in that listening, I had found not captivity, but the freedom of connection across the boundless reaches of space.